Hello and welcome to SOCH111 History of Healing. This is session 2 and this is the first part of a two-part lecture. And this session we're looking at the history of healing. So the session aims for this lecture are to explore the importance of philosophy as a guide to problem solving, to compare and contrast concepts of holism, constructionism and reductionism as they relate to science and medicine, and to explore how health, disease and cure have been conceptualised across cultures and time. So let's start with some definitions. What is philosophy? Well, philosophy is the study of or a particular set of ideas about knowledge, truth, the nature and meaning of life and so forth. Or more succinctly, a set of ideas about how to do something or how to live. Philosophy relates to values and ethics and also to religious or spiritual beliefs or ideas. So ideas on nature and the meaning of life necessarily are influenced by, religious beliefs, spiritual beliefs and concepts of right and wrong. The term cosmology is one that we're going to see a bit throughout this course, and cosmology is really the realm of thinking, which is related to philosophy and often to religion. It's actually a branch of philosophy that's specifically interested in understanding the origin and the general structure of the universe, or what some cultures might understand as creation, with all its parts, elements, laws, and especially its characteristics of space, time, causality and freedom. It's also used to name a branch of astronomy that deals with the structure and evolution of the universe. So philosophy and cosmology are intricately interwoven with medicine since the beginning of medicine. You could easily suggest that medicine grew out of philosophy. Questions on the meaning of life and the laws of nature naturally lead to questions about why we get sick and what causes us to get better or not. So this slide really is a brief overview of some of the different sorts of philosophical themes that we're going to look at this semester, and we're going to see different themes as predominating in different cultures, and in different historical time periods. So in each system we're going to look at the philosophical underpinnings of the cultures and the medical traditions, and we're going to see that in some cases the two things are tightly entwined, and in other cases less so. So let's take a look at some of these basic philosophies. Concepts of illness are often related to supernatural theories of disease and healing, so people becoming ill and then becoming healed thanks to the influence of gods, spirits, witchcraft and human behaviour. Certain philosophical medical traditions sort of pay a lot of attention to the laws of nature and the place of humans within that bigger natural scene, whereas other medical traditions have a focus on humans being able to dominate nature. We're looking at 4 and 5 element theories and the concept of balance. These are philosophies that underpin numerous medical traditions, and sources of life energy and the relationship that this has to health are philosophies that are commonly seen in different systems and talked about and understood in different ways. One example might be the concept of qi in Chinese medicine. The role of the doctor and healer versus the role of the patient. There are some vastly different philosophies about what it is that a doctor should do and does do. What is the difference between a doctor and a healer? what are the responsibilities of a doctor and the responsibilities of a healer, and what are the responsibilities of a patient. These are very different belief systems that exist in different philosophical medical traditions. And then concepts about disease as being an entity to be eradicated versus wellness as a state to be cultivated. Once again, some very basic different philosophies about medicine and illness. So while this subject is called The History of Healing, it could actually be subtitled "And the Philosophies That Created That History." So just keep this in mind as we travel through the semester, as we learn about the various philosophies and the different practices and beliefs of various healers within those medical traditions. How these philosophies are connected and translated into what practitioners actually do is where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, and really talks to why philosophy is so important. So what physicians think medicine is profoundly shapes what they do, how they behave in doing it, and the reasons they use to justify that behaviour. Whether conscious of it or not, every physician has an answer to what he thinks medicine is, with real consequences for all whom he attends. The outcome is hardly trivial. It dictates, after all, how we approach patients, how we make clinical judgments. So let's revisit the definition of philosophy. It's a set of beliefs on how to do something. It's closely related to how philosophy and medicine are connected. And in this way we can also see that philosophy and science are closely connected. So as with the philosophy of medicine, the philosophy of science is something that has changed dramatically over time through history. So the questions on this slide are really left for pondering. There's perhaps no definitive answers for these questions. And this is actually demonstrative of the beauty, the simultaneous beauty and frustration of philosophy. Also often investigations into the nature of the world and of reality just lead to more and more questions. So what we're going to do is talk about some fundamental methods of observation and analysis so that we can recognise these as we move through the historical landscape this semester. Perspective. One's approach to science and philosophy as they relate to medicine is dependent on one's perspective. Two people can look at the same thing and see two very different things, or one person can look at the same thing from two different perspectives and see two very different things. So what do you see when you look at this slide here, a duck or a rabbit? Or do you see both? So we're going to briefly go through a couple of different perspective types in science and medicine in the coming slides. So we touched on the perspective of holistic medicine in the last lecture. Here is a broader definition of holism as it relates to any concept, be it human beings or a thunderstorm, or a car, or a computer, or perhaps a forest, or even perhaps a field of crops. Holism is a perspective, it's a view on the world and the way it works. So the word holism is derived from the Greek word meaning all, entire, or total, and the Greek word is holos. It's a general principle of holism. The general principle of holism is concisely summarised by Aristotle, who said the whole is more than just the sum of its parts. In the philosophy of systems theory, which is one modern approach to holism, we can see the following. The behaviour of an atom does not help us predict the total behaviour of a molecule. The behaviour of a molecule doesn't help us predict the total behaviour of a cellular organelle. The behaviour of a cellular organelle does not help us predict the total behaviour of a cell. The behaviour of a cell does not help us predict the total behaviour of a tissue. The behaviour of a tissue does not help us predict the total behaviour of an organ. The behaviour of an organ does not help us predict the total behaviour of a body system. The behaviour of a body system does not help us predict the total behaviour of a body. The behaviour of a body does not help us predict the total behaviour of a person. The behaviour of a person does not help us predict the total behaviour of a family or of a community. The behaviour of a family or a community does not help us predict the total behaviour of humankind. The behaviour of humankind does not help us predict the total behaviour of the planet. And the behaviour of the planet does not help us predict the total behaviour of the universe. So, a holistic method of inquiry seeks to observe the behaviour of the whole. So in medicine, this necessarily includes looking at the body, looking at the mind, the emotions, the spirit, and it might also extend to looking at the environment that the person exists in, their culture, their education, the economy of that situation, that environment, and any other factor that has the capacity to influence health. So imagine a farmer who's farming a field of crops, who only pays attention to the insects that are affecting his crops. He might be very effective at dealing with those insects, but fails to pay attention to the water, what nutrients or microbes or water holding capacity the soil has, what degree of sun or shade the crops are getting, whether they're planted too closely together or not, whether they're overcrowded. So will these plants grow optimally? A farmer who considers all of these factors can be looking at his crops from a holistic perspective. The question then has to be asked, when is a holistic perspective useful? Well, it's useful when one wants to understand the overall behaviour of a complex system, or examine patterns of stimulus and response in populations of complex systems. It's useful when the behaviour of one part of a complex system is inadequate to inform or appropriately influence the whole of that system. And it's useful any time you're interested in the experience or outcome of a whole. For example, the quality of life of a person, or the existence of patterns of behaviour or phenomena from which you might draw conclusions about the nature of a system. So we can see that its holistic perspective is very much appropriate for dealing with people. The next question we need to then consider is, what are the drawbacks of holism? So, observation that's broad and deep enough to truly take in the whole is challenging for the human mind. It might not be sufficient to isolate a problem to its true cause, or to create a solution to that problem that may be effective, because there might not be enough understanding of the workings of the smaller parts that contribute to the whole. We see a good example of this when we look at the persistence of humoral medicine in European history, which we're going to look at later in the semester. Okay, now we move on to reductionism. So, reductionism is the practice of analysing and describing a complex phenomenon in terms of its simple or fundamental constituents, especially when this is said to provide a sufficient explanation. Reductionism is the counterpoint to holism, and it's the dominant perspective of current philosophy of science and medicine in the Western world. Like holism, it's a view on the world and how the world works. And in this view, the observer is deconstructing a whole into observable parts, examining and drawing conclusions about how those parts work, and then accepting those conclusions as self-contained explanations. The roots of reductionist thinking come from the 17th century French philosopher René Descartes and his Cartesian method. He sought to look at everything physical as a machine, and in this way a machine made up of parts that could be teased out of the whole and examined independently to sort of determine or understand how they work. And the idea being that if one relentlessly pursued understanding of how the minute parts work, eventually the entire workings of the world would be understood and explained. So it would be easy to see how modern science has followed this method from Descartes' time through to the present as we travel through history this semester. So a reductionist perspective seeks to look at the component parts of a system and figure out how those parts work in fine detail. The image here is one of the major products that reductionist science has given us, which is an understanding of the major biochemical pathways in the body and how those pathways interact with each other. New biochemicals and receptors and the ways in which the pathways interact with each other are still being discovered. And new drugs that are designed specifically to interact in some way with the individual biochemical pathways are being developed all the time. As we travel through history and witness medicine move into its modern reductionist perspective, we'll see some of the many gifts that this perspective has given us. Our modern understandings of physiology, pathology, germ theory and microbiology, clinical examination and other sciences come from a reductionist scientific perspective. And this doesn't just relate to conventional medicine. Nutritional and herbal medicines have most definitely have reductionist aspects to them, as we've learned about the influence of specific nutrients on specific biochemical pathways in the body, or the influence of isolated herbal chemical constituents on specific organs or systems. So the question needs to be asked, when is a reductionist medicine model most useful? Well, it's most useful when a medical problem is isolated or has a simple cause. For example, a broken bone or other injury, or a failing heart valve or an infection. Or it's useful when a complex multifactorial problem needs a heroic single intervention to save a life. For example, the removal of a cancerous tumour. And the follow-on question to that is, when is a reductionist method of medicine most challenged? And this is when a medical problem has a variety of causes, or the causes are not well understood, or when a problem involves a complex set of interactions between body systems or biochemical pathways, such that intervening in one may cause undesired outcomes for another. Anytime the interaction of the well understood part is not itself well understood, or in other words, when taking the parts apart to examine them in isolation breaks some link to how the different parts interact, is one example of when a reductionist method might not be useful. Also, when the tools available to address a problem are not well matched for the complexity of the problem. There's a saying, if the only tool that you have is a hammer, you tend to see every problem as if it was a nail. So the drawbacks of a reductionist approach are that it tends to focus on a single factor, or to treat multiple factors as though they were isolated from one another. It focuses on restoring homeostatic normal ranges in certain factors, and doesn't recognise that the existence of an abnormal factor may be a valuable adaptive response by the body. It focuses too narrowly on risk factors for diseases, for example, high blood pressure as a risk factor for heart disease. And it tackles a patient with multiple issues by a piecemeal approach that can lead to additive treatments rather than looking at what connects all of the varied problems. Because a reductionist perspective currently holds the dominant view in Western society, but patients and doctors are bumping up against its limitations in the types of chronic Western diseases that predominate in our culture, there's a major present tension between holistic and reductionist views. Fritjof Capra identifies the current dominance of reductionism, saying, the Cartesian view of the universe as a mechanical system provided a scientific sanction for the manipulation and exploitation of nature that has become typical of Western culture. Descartes himself shared Bacon's view that the aim of science was the domination and control of nature. But humanity is moving towards a more naturalistic worldview as we look at climate change staring us in the face and come to understand the costs of our attempts to dominate and control nature through industry and technology and exploitation of natural resources. Capra also comments that overemphasis on the Cartesian method has led to the fragmentation that is characteristic of both our general thinking and our academic disciplines, and to the widespread attitude of reductionism in science. The belief that all aspects of complex phenomena can be understood by reducing them to their constituent parts. The solution appears to be for the two perspectives to learn to appreciate their strengths, contributions and weaknesses, and come into a balance of approach that allows us to take maximal benefit from both. Many modern complementary medicines, especially the ingestible therapies, have taken this balanced approach with a solid foundation in biosciences, partnering with the use of a holistic clinical approach. Okay, here we have inductive and deductive reasoning. So inductive reasoning can be seen as, or otherwise known as, qualitative reasoning, which is systematic observation that allows generalization of a pattern to arrive at a probable conclusion that can be applied theoretically to future instances. And deductive reasoning, which is more understood in a quantitative, as being a quantitative approach. And this is a formulation of a theory and hypothesis based on known rules or phenomena, and designing conditions to test that hypothesis through observation in order to confirm, modify or reject it. So these two modes of reasoning are perspectives on scientific inquiry that are often seen hand in hand with holism and reductionism, respectively, though the correlation is not exact by any means. The overwhelming majority of the history of medicine relied on inductive reasoning, most of that being very informal or undocumented as far as we know, but some of it being quite formalised and systematic, as we see when we get to the lecture on Hahnemann and his homeopathic provings later on in the semester. Medical science in the past century or so has been more focused on deductive reasoning. An example of this is how a new drug might be formulated and tested. Say I want to develop a drug that lowers cholesterol in the blood, and what I already know as a rule is that cholesterol is produced by a specific biochemical pathway in the liver. So I formulate a theory that if I can interrupt that pathway, I can stop the liver making cholesterol and thus reduce the level of cholesterol in the bloodstream. So I develop a drug that's designed to interrupt that pathway, and then I have a hypothesis that the drug will lower blood cholesterol when given to humans with high blood cholesterol. I design a study to deliver the drug to a group of people and observe what their blood cholesterol is before and after administration. If the cholesterol goes down, then my hypothesis is confirmed. Okay, some revision questions before we move into the break. Some things to consider. Explain why philosophy is important in medicine and healing, and describe the differences between holism and reductionism as a philosophical perspective in healthcare. And some other food for thought. You've chosen to study in this field of complementary medicine. Was it in your own personal philosophy? What is it in your own personal philosophy that underlies that decision? Okay, we'll take a break now and I'll see you after the break.